The bustling airport was alive with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to catch flights, families saying tearful goodbyes, and the constant hum of announcements over the loudspeaker. Among the crowd was a young black teenager, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, standing near the check-in counter. He looked calm but slightly out of place, as if he were waiting for someone. His presence, however, seemed to draw the attention of a few airport staff members, who exchanged glances and whispered among themselves. The teenager, who had been minding his own business, suddenly found himself approached by a stern-looking airport employee. The staff member, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard in hand, asked him in a sharp tone, "Excuse me, young man, do you have a ticket? What are you doing here?" The teenager, slightly taken aback, replied politely, "I'm waiting for my mom. She's picking me up." The staff member narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. "This is a restricted area. You can't just stand here without a ticket or a boarding pass. Do you have any identification?" The teenager hesitated for a moment before reaching into his pocket to pull out his ID. He handed it over, but the staff member's demeanor didn't soften. She glanced at the ID, then back at him, as if trying to piece together a story in her head. Without another word, she walked away, but the teenager could see her talking to another staff member, this time pointing in his direction. A sense of unease began to creep over him. Minutes later, 2 security guards approached him. One of them, a tall man with a no-nonsense expression, said, "Sir, we need you to come with us for a quick check. We've received a report about suspicious activity in this area." The teenager's heart began to race. Suspicious activity? "I'm just waiting for my mom," he protested, but the guards were already motioning for him to follow them. Reluctantly, he complied, feeling the weight of curious stares from other travelers as he was led away. The scene shifted to the airport security office, a small, dimly lit room with a desk and a few chairs. The teenager was asked to sit down while the guards began questioning him. "What's your name? Why are you here? Do you have any proof that you're supposed to be in this area?" The questions came rapid fire, and the teenager struggled to keep up. He explained again that he was waiting for his mother, who was supposed to pick him up after her meeting at the airport. But the guards seemed skeptical, their tone growing more accusatory with each passing minute. Meanwhile, outside the security office, the teenager's mother had just arrived at the airport. She was a well-dressed woman, exuding confidence and authority as she walked through the terminal. She glanced at her watch, realizing she was a few minutes late. As she approached the check-in counter where she had told her son to wait, she noticed a small crowd gathered nearby, whispering and pointing. Her heart sank when she realized her son was nowhere to be seen. She approached one of the staff members and asked, "Excuse me, have you seen a young boy waiting here?" "He's my son." The staff member, the same woman who had questioned the teenager earlier, looked at her with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Your son? Are you sure? He didn't mention anything about being picked up. We had to call security because he was loitering in a restricted area." The mother's eyes widened in disbelief. "Loitering? He's my son. He was waiting for me. Where is he now?" The staff member hesitated, then pointed toward the security office. "He's being questioned by security. We had to follow protocol." Without another word, the mother turned on her heel and marched toward the security office, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. When she reached the office, she pushed the door open without knocking. The scene inside was tense. Her son sat in a chair, looking visibly upset, while the 2 guards stood over him, their arms crossed. The mother's presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice firm and commanding. The guards turned to her, momentarily caught off guard by her authoritative tone. One of the guards stammered, "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Your son was found in a restricted area without a ticket or boarding pass. We had to bring him in for questioning." The mother's eyes flashed with anger. He's a minor, and he was waiting for me. Is this how you treat children at this airport? By accusing them of being suspicious without any evidence? The guards exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. The mother, however, wasn't finished. She reached into her bag and pulled out her identification, handing it to the guards. I suggest you take a good look at this before you make any more mistakes. The guards took the ID, and their expressions changed almost instantly. One of them paled, while the other quickly handed the ID back, stammering an apology. The mother turned to her son, her expression softening. Are you okay? She asked gently. He nodded, though he still looked shaken. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder before turning back to the guards. I expect a full explanation for this, and I will be filing a formal complaint. This kind of treatment is unacceptable. With that, she led her son out of the security office, leaving the guards and staff members in stunned silence. As they walked through the terminal, the teenager couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and anger. His mother, however, remained calm, her focus now on ensuring her son was okay and that this incident wouldn't be swept under the rug. The story was far from over, but for now, the teenager was safe, and his mother had made it clear that she wouldn't let anyone treat her family unfairly. As they exited the airport, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. The teenager glanced at his mother, feeling a newfound sense of pride and gratitude. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had someone in his corner who would always fight for him. As they stepped out of the airport and into the cool evening air, the teenager finally felt like he could breathe again. The tension from the security office still lingered, but his mother's presence was a calming force. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and gave him a reassuring smile. Let's get you home, she said softly. He nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. The ride home was quiet at first. The teenager stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. His mind raced with questions. Why had they targeted him? Was it because of how he looked? His mother, sensing his unease, broke the silence. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, she said, her voice filled with empathy. What happened back there was wrong, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. He turned to look at her, his expression a mix of frustration and confusion. Why did they even stop me? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just standing there, waiting for you. His mother sighed, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. Sometimes, people make assumptions based on appearances, and it's not fair. But that doesn't mean we stay silent. We stand up for ourselves and make sure our voices are heard. Her words resonated with him, but they also stirred up a sense of anger. It's not right, he muttered, his voice low. They treated me like I was some kind of criminal. I didn't even do anything. His mother reached over and squeezed his hand. I know, sweetheart. And I'm proud of how you handled yourself. You stayed calm and respectful, even when they weren't. That takes strength. When they arrived home, the teenager headed straight to his room, needing some time to himself. His mother, however, wasn't ready to let the matter rest. She sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out her laptop, and began drafting a formal complaint to the airport's management. She detailed the incident, emphasizing the unnecessary escalation and the emotional toll it had taken on her son. She also requested a meeting with the airport's higher-ups to discuss how such situations could be handled better in the future. The next morning, the teenager woke up feeling a little better, but the events of the previous day still weighed heavily on his mind. Over breakfast, his mother shared her plan of action. I've sent a complaint to the airport, and I'm going to follow up with a phone call today. I also think it's important to share what happened, not just for us, but to raise awareness about how these situations can affect people. He looked up from his cereal, a hint of concern in his eyes. Are you sure that's a good idea? What if it makes things worse? His mother smiled gently. Sometimes, speaking up is the only way to make things better. If we stay silent, nothing will change. But if we share our story, it might help others who've been through something similar. Later that day, the mother received a call from the airport's customer service department. The representative apologized for the incident and assured her that they were taking the matter seriously. They also offered to arrange a meeting with the airport's head of security to discuss the situation further. The mother agreed, but she made it clear that she expected concrete steps to be taken to prevent such incidents in the future. Meanwhile, the teenager decided to open up to a close friend about what had happened. As he recounted the story, he was surprised by how supportive his friend was. "That's messed up," his friend said, shaking his head. "You didn't deserve to be treated like that. But I'm glad your mom was there to back you up." The conversation made him feel less alone, and he realized that sharing his experience could be a way to connect with others who might have faced similar situations. As the days passed, the mother's complaint began to gain traction. She shared the story on social media, and it quickly caught the attention of local news outlets. People from all walks of life reached out to express their support, sharing their own stories of being unfairly targeted or mistreated. The teenager was amazed by the outpouring of solidarity, and it gave him a sense of hope that change was possible. The airport, feeling the pressure from the public response, issued a formal statement acknowledging the incident and promising to review their policies and training procedures. They also invited the mother and her son to a meeting to discuss their concerns in person. The teenager was hesitant at first, but his mother encouraged him to attend. "This is your chance to be heard," she said. "Your voice matters." As they prepared for the meeting, the teenager couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and determination. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that standing up for what was right was worth it. With his mother by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The day of the meeting arrived, and the teenager and his mother made their way to the airport's administrative offices. The building was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the chaos of the terminal. As they walked in, they were greeted by a receptionist who directed them to a conference room. The teenager's heart pounded as they entered the room, where several airport officials were already seated around a large table. The head of security, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, stood up to greet them. "Thank you for coming," he said, extending a hand. The mother shook it firmly, her demeanor calm but resolute. The teenager followed her lead, though he couldn't help feeling a little intimidated by the formal setting. The meeting began with the head of security offering a formal apology for the incident. "We deeply regret what happened and the distress it caused you and your son," he said. "This is not the standard of service we strive for, and we are committed to making things right." The mother nodded, but her expression remained serious. "An apology is a good start," she said, "but we're here to discuss how you plan to prevent this from happening again." The officials then outlined the steps they were taking to address the situation. They explained that they were reviewing their training programs to ensure staff members were better equipped to handle similar situations without resorting to unnecessary escalation. They also mentioned plans to implement clearer guidelines for identifying and addressing suspicious behavior, emphasizing the importance of avoiding bias. The teenager listened intently, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. When it was his turn to speak, he took a deep breath and said, "I understand that you're trying to make changes, but what happened to me wasn't just about training or guidelines. It was about how I was treated because of how I look. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I was treated like a threat. That's not something a policy can fix, it's about how people see me." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. The officials exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by his honesty. The head of security nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "This isn't just about procedures, it's about attitudes and perceptions. We need to do better, and that starts with listening to people like you who've been affected by these issues." The mother then spoke up, her voice steady but firm. We appreciate the steps you're taking, but we also want to see accountability. The staff members involved in this incident need to understand the impact of their actions. This isn't just about one mistake, it's about the broader pattern of how people of color are treated in spaces like this. The officials assured them that the staff members involved would undergo additional training and that their actions would be reviewed as part of the airport's broader efforts to address bias. They also promised to keep the mother and her son updated on their progress. By the end of the meeting, the teenager felt a sense of cautious optimism. He knew that real change would take time, but he also felt proud of himself and his mother for standing up and demanding accountability. As they left the airport, the teenager turned to his mother and said, "Do you think they'll actually do what they said?" She smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll have to wait and see, but the important thing is that we spoke up. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with conversations like the one we just had." The teenager nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his experience, while painful, had given him an opportunity to make a difference, not just for himself, but for others who might face similar situations in the future. As they drove home, he felt a quiet determination growing within him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. In the days following the meeting, the teenager found himself reflecting more deeply on what had happened. The support from his family, friends, and even strangers online had been overwhelming, but it also made him realize how common his experience was. He began reading stories from others who had faced similar situations, people who had been unfairly targeted because of their race, gender, or appearance. Each story resonated with him, and he felt a growing desire to do something more. One evening, as he sat at the dinner table with his mother, he brought up the idea that had been forming in his mind. "What if we started something to help people who've been through stuff like this?" he asked. "Like a platform where they can share their stories and get support?" His mother looked at him, her eyes lighting up with pride. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "It could be a way to turn something negative into something positive." With his mother's encouragement, the teenager began working on the project. He reached out to a few friends who were good with technology, and together they started building a website. They decided to call it Speak Up, a platform where people could share their experiences of discrimination or unfair treatment and connect with others who understood what they were going through. The teenager also reached out to some of the people who had supported him online, asking if they'd be willing to share their stories on the site. The response was incredible. Within a week, the website was live, and stories began pouring in. People from all over the country shared their experiences, from being followed in stores to being stopped by police for no reason. The teenager was amazed by the courage of those who shared their stories, and he felt a sense of responsibility to make sure their voices were heard. As the platform grew, it caught the attention of local media. A reporter reached out to the teenager, asking if he'd be willing to do an interview about the project. At first, he was nervous. He had never done anything like this before, but his mother encouraged him. "This is your chance to spread the message even further," she said. "You've worked so hard on this, and people need to hear what you have to say." The interview went better than he could have imagined. The reporter was kind and supportive, and the teenager found himself speaking passionately about why he had started the platform. "It's not just about sharing stories," he said. "It's about showing people that they're not alone and that together, we can make a difference." The interview was published online and quickly gained traction, bringing even more attention to the platform. With the increased visibility came new challenges. The teenager and his team worked tirelessly to moderate the site, ensuring it remained a safe and supportive space. They also began organizing virtual events, like panel discussions and workshops, to educate people about bias and discrimination. The teenager even reached out to the airport officials they had met with, inviting them to participate in a discussion about improving inclusivity in public spaces. As the project continued to grow, the teenager felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. He knew there was still a long way to go, but he also knew that every story shared, every conversation started, was a step in the right direction. And with his mother by his side, he felt ready to keep pushing forward. The Speak Up platform continued to gain momentum, and the teenager found himself busier than ever. Between managing the website, organizing events, and responding to messages from users, his days were packed. But despite the workload, he felt a deep sense of purpose. Every message of gratitude or story shared reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. One day, as he was reviewing submissions on the platform, he came across a story that struck a chord with him. It was from a young girl, not much younger than himself, who had been unfairly targeted by a teacher at her school. She wrote about how she had been accused of cheating on a test simply because she had finished it quickly. The teacher had singled her out in front of the entire class, and the experience had left her feeling humiliated and discouraged. The teenager felt a surge of anger as he read her words, but also a sense of determination. He reached out to her, offering words of encouragement and inviting her to share her story on the platform. He also suggested that she consider speaking to her parents or a trusted adult about what had happened. The girl responded gratefully, and her story was soon featured on the site, sparking a wave of support from the community. This interaction made the teenager realize that Speak Up could be more than just a platform for sharing stories. It could also be a resource for young people who didn't know where to turn. He decided to expand the site to include a section with advice and resources, such as how to handle discrimination, where to seek help, and how to advocate for change. He reached out to experts in the field, including counselors and activists, who were willing to contribute their knowledge. Around the same time, the airport officials they had met with reached out to the teenager and his mother. They had been working on implementing the changes they had discussed during their meeting and wanted to invite them back to see the progress they had made. The teenager was hesitant at first, unsure if the changes would be meaningful, but his mother encouraged him to go. "It's important to hold people accountable," she said. "But it's also important to acknowledge when they're trying to do better." When they arrived at the airport, they were greeted by the head of security, who led them on a tour of the new training facilities. They observed a session where staff members were being trained on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. The teenager was impressed by the effort they were putting in, but he also made sure to ask tough questions. "How do you plan to measure the success of these changes?" he asked. "And what happens if someone doesn't follow the new guidelines?" The head of security acknowledged that change wouldn't happen overnight but assured them that they were committed to continuous improvement. He also mentioned that they were working on creating a feedback system where travelers could report incidents of bias or unfair treatment. The teenager appreciated the transparency and felt hopeful that the airport was moving in the right direction. As they left the airport, the teenager felt a mix of emotions. He was proud of the progress they had helped inspire, but he also knew there was still so much work to be done. He turned to his mother and said, "I think this is just the beginning." She smiled and nodded. "It is," she said. "And I'm so proud of you for being a part of it." The success of the Speak Up platform continued to grow, and the teenager found himself becoming a voice for change in his community. Schools, local organizations, and even businesses began reaching out to him, asking if he would speak at events or help them develop initiatives to address bias and discrimination. It was overwhelming at times, but he was determined to use the opportunity to make a difference. One of the most meaningful invitations came from his own school. The principal reached out to him, asking if he would be willing to lead a workshop for students and staff on understanding and combating bias. The teenager was nervous. He had never spoken in front of such a large audience before, but he knew it was an important opportunity. With his mother's encouragement, he agreed. The day of the workshop arrived, and the teenager stood in front of a packed auditorium, his heart racing. He took a deep breath and began to speak, sharing his own story and the journey that had led him to create Speak Up. He talked about the importance of recognizing bias, both in ourselves and in the world around us, and the power of standing up for what's right. As he spoke, He could see the audience listening intently, their faces reflecting a mix of emotions, empathy, understanding, and even guilt. After his presentation, he opened the floor for questions. A teacher raised her hand and asked, "What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen to other students?" The teenager thought for a moment before responding. "It starts with listening," he said. "When someone shares their experience, believe them. And don't be afraid to speak up when you see something wrong, even if it's uncomfortable." The workshop was a success, and the teenager left feeling a sense of accomplishment. But the experience also made him realize how much more work there was to do. He decided to expand the Speak Up platform to include resources specifically for schools, such as lesson plans and activities to help students and staff have conversations about bias and discrimination. Meanwhile, the airport continued to make progress with their initiatives. They invited the teenager and his mother back for a follow-up meeting, where they shared data on the impact of their new training programs. Incidents of reported bias had decreased significantly, and travelers had responded positively to the new feedback system. The head of security thanked them for their role in inspiring the changes and asked if they would be willing to serve as advisors on their ongoing efforts. The teenager was honored by the request but also felt the weight of the responsibility. He knew that being an advisor would mean staying involved and holding the airport accountable, but he also saw it as an opportunity to ensure that the changes were meaningful and lasting. With his mother's support, he agreed. As the weeks went by, the teenager found himself juggling school, the Speak Up platform, and his new role as an advisor. It was a lot to handle, but he was determined to keep going. He knew that every small step forward was a step toward a more just and inclusive world. One evening, as he sat at his desk working on a new resource for the platform, his mother came in and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "You're making a real difference." He smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude and purpose. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. The teenager's life had become a whirlwind of activity, but he wouldn't have had it any other way. Between school, the Speak Up platform, and his advisory role with the airport, he was constantly on the move. Yet, despite the busy schedule, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Every message of thanks, every story shared, and every small victory reminded him why he had started this journey. One afternoon, as he was preparing for a virtual panel discussion on combating bias in schools, he received an unexpected email. It was from a national nonprofit organization that focused on social justice and youth empowerment. They had heard about Speak Up and wanted to collaborate on a nationwide campaign to raise awareness about discrimination and bias. The email ended with an invitation to meet with their team to discuss potential ideas. The teenager was stunned. This was the kind of opportunity he had never imagined when he first started the platform. He immediately called his mother to share the news. "This is incredible," she said, her voice filled with pride. "It's a chance to take your message to an even bigger audience." A few weeks later, the teenager and his mother traveled to the nonprofit's headquarters in a nearby city. The meeting was inspiring. The team had big ideas, everything from social media campaigns to youth-led workshops in schools across the country. They wanted Speak Up to be at the center of it all, and they were eager to hear the teenager's input. As they discussed the campaign, the teenager felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was a huge step, and he knew it would require even more time and effort. But he also knew it was an opportunity to create real, lasting change. By the end of the meeting, they had outlined a plan for the campaign, which they decided to call Raise Your Voice. It would launch in a few months, with the teenager playing a key role in its development and promotion. When they returned home, the teenager threw himself into the preparations. He worked closely with the nonprofit's team, helping to design materials, plan events, and recruit other young people to join the campaign. It was a lot of work, but he was energized by the sense of purpose and the knowledge that he was part of something bigger than himself. Meanwhile, the airport's initiatives continued to make progress. The teenager and his mother attended regular meetings with the head of security and other officials, providing feedback and suggestions for improvement. The airport had started hosting community forums to hear directly from travelers about their experiences, and they were using the feedback to make further changes. The teenager was proud of the role he had played in inspiring these efforts, but he also remained vigilant, making sure the airport stayed true to its commitments. As the launch of the Raise Your Voice campaign approached, the teenager found himself reflecting on how far he had come. What had started as a painful experience at the airport had turned into a movement that was touching lives across the country. He thought about all the people who had shared their stories on the Speak Up platform and the connections he had made along the way. It was humbling to realize how much impact one voice could have. The night before the campaign launch, the teenager sat down with his mother to talk about everything that had happened. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her eyes shining with emotion. "You've turned something so difficult into something so powerful. You're making a difference, not just for yourself, but for so many others." The teenager smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." The next day, the Raise Your Voice campaign launched with a virtual event featuring the teenager and other young activists. Thousands of people tuned in to hear their stories and learn how they could get involved. The teenager spoke passionately about the importance of standing up against bias and discrimination, and his words resonated with everyone who listened. As the event ended, the teenager felt a sense of hope and determination. He knew there was still so much work to be done, but he also knew that he wasn't alone. Together with his mother, his community, and the countless others who had joined the movement, he was ready to keep pushing forward. The Raise Your Voice campaign took off in ways the teenager could never have imagined. Social media was flooded with stories, videos, and messages from people across the country sharing their experiences and standing up against bias and discrimination. Schools, community centers, and even businesses began hosting their own events as part of the campaign, creating a ripple effect of awareness and action. The teenager found himself at the center of it all, traveling to different cities to speak at events, participating in interviews, and meeting with other young activists. It was exhausting at times, but he was fueled by the energy and passion of the people he met. Everywhere he went, he was inspired by their courage and determination to make a difference. One of the most memorable moments of the campaign came during a visit to a high school in a small town. The teenager was invited to speak to the students about his journey and the importance of standing up against bias. As he stood in front of the auditorium, he noticed a group of students sitting together, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He knew that not everyone would immediately connect with his message, but he was determined to reach them. He began by sharing his own story, describing the incident at the airport and how it had led him to create Speak Up. He talked about the power of sharing stories and the importance of listening to others, even when it's uncomfortable. As he spoke, he could see the students' expressions begin to change. By the time he finished, the room was silent, and then erupted into applause. After the presentation, a group of students approached him. One of them, a girl with a determined look in her eyes, said, "Your story really hit home for me. I've been through something similar, and I've always felt like no one would understand. But hearing you talk made me realize that I'm not alone." The teenager smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection. "You're not alone," he said. "And your voice matters. Don't ever be afraid to use it." As the campaign continued to gain momentum, the teenager also faced new challenges. Not everyone was supportive of the movement, and he occasionally encountered criticism or pushback. There were times when he felt discouraged, but his mother was always there to remind him of why he had started this journey. "Change isn't easy," she said. "But it's worth it. And you're making a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like it." Meanwhile, the airport's initiatives were also making progress. The teenager and his mother attended a community forum where travelers shared their experiences and provided feedback on the changes that had been implemented. Many people expressed gratitude for the airport's efforts, but there were also those who shared stories of ongoing challenges. The teenager listened carefully, knowing that there was still work to be done. At the end of the forum, the head of security addressed the crowd. "We've made a lot of progress, but we know there's still more to do," he said. "And we're committed to continuing this work, with your help and feedback." The teenager felt a sense of pride as he realized the impact they had made, but he also knew that this was just the beginning. As the campaign entered its final weeks, the teenager began to think about what came next. He knew that "Raise Your Voice" was just one step in a much larger journey, and he was determined to keep the momentum going. He started brainstorming ideas for new initiatives, such as a mentorship program for young activists and a series of workshops on advocacy and leadership. One evening, as he sat at his desk working on a proposal for the mentorship program, his mother came in and sat down beside him. "You've done so much already," she said. "But I know you're just getting started. What's next?" The teenager smiled, feeling a sense of excitement and possibility. "I'm not sure yet," he said. "But I know that whatever it is, it's going to be big. And I'm ready for it." The Raise Your Voice campaign concluded with a final virtual event that brought together thousands of participants from across the country. The teenager stood at the center of it all, his voice steady and filled with conviction as he addressed the audience. "This campaign has shown us the power of our collective voices," he said. "But it's not the end. It's just the beginning. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." The event was a celebration of all that had been accomplished, but it was also a call to action. The teenager announced the launch of a new initiative, the Speak Up Mentorship Program, which would pair young activists with experienced mentors to help them develop their skills and amplify their voices. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of young people signing up to participate. As the campaign wrapped up, the teenager took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. What had started as a painful experience at the airport had grown into a movement that was touching lives across the country. He thought about all the people he had met, the stories he had heard, and the connections he had made. It was humbling to realize how much impact one voice could have, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support he had received along the way. But he also knew that the work was far from over. Bias and discrimination were still pervasive, and there were countless others who needed their voices to be heard. The teenager was determined to keep pushing forward, using the momentum from the campaign to drive even greater change. One of the first steps was expanding the Speak Up platform to include more resources and tools for young activists. He worked with a team of volunteers to create guides on everything from organizing events to advocating for policy changes. They also launched a podcast where young people could share their stories and discuss issues that mattered to them. The teenager hosted the first episode, interviewing a young activist who had successfully campaigned for changes in her school's dress code policy. Meanwhile, the airport continued to make progress with their initiatives. The teenager and his mother attended a ceremony where the airport unveiled a new mural celebrating diversity and inclusion. The mural, created by a local artist, featured images of people from all walks of life, their faces filled with hope and determination. As they stood in front of the mural, the teenager felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. He knew that the changes they had inspired were making a real difference, but he also knew that there was still more work to be done. As the weeks turned into months, the teenager found himself busier than ever. Between school, the Speak Up platform, and the mentorship program, his days were packed. But he wouldn't have had it any other way. Every message of thanks, every story shared, and every small victory reminded him why he had started this journey. One evening, as he sat at his desk working on a new resource for the platform, his mother came in and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "You've turned something so difficult into something so powerful. You're making a difference, not just for yourself, but for so many others. The teenager smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." As he looked ahead to the future, the teenager felt a sense of hope and determination. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he wasn't alone. Together with his mother, his community, and the countless others who had joined the movement, he was ready to keep pushing forward. And so, the journey continued, one story, one voice, one step at a time.